Hello and welcome to Forgotten Fronts, and today we're going to be continuing, as you can see, the attack of Bylandt's Corps, except for it's a bit different as I may or may not have lost the footage of the first video. And so we're going to carry on roughly where we left off last time. The only difference in this scenario is that I decided to attack directly with the columns, after bombarding with artillery slightly, opposed to moving up skirmishers like in last time, as I found that it weakened the first wave too much. Anyway, we're moving up for the columns, in between the two brigades, just like last time, splitting Wellington's line down the center, between the German and Dutch troops around Bijlandt, and the German and British troops around La Haye-Saint and Hougoumont, hoping to shatter Wellington's lines just before the crossroads in between Bijlandt and La Haye-Saint, before capturing both of them. Our main objectives will be the left and right hand side of his lines, as well as the farmhouse of La Haye-Saint itself. Most of the objectives will be a tough nut to crack, as there's two lines of infantry that I have to go through to attack Wellington's center, and the farmhouse of La Haye-Saint is guarded by elite troops from Hanover, called the King's German Legion, made up of Hanoverian and refugees after Napoleon's invasion. And just behind the lines on the ridge, there stands a Union Brigade, including the Royal North British Dragoons, otherwise known as the Scots Greys. But just now, we're starting our attack on La Haye-Saint, which will be a vicious fight to the end. Moving up Charles' brigade, I decide to attack only with the first two regiments, only replacing them when they run out of ammo or get too severely depleted, rushing them up through the orchard as they take sustained, accurate fire from the marksmen of the King's German Legion light troops, armed with rifles which were slow to load but deadly accurate. In the meantime, I move up my columns up the ridge to flank around the two brigades, taking particular notes of the cannons of the Royal Artillery who can pour canister fire into our ranks, causing extreme morale and casualties. The other major part of this first attack will be their skirmishers, which will also need to be pushed back in order to fight the two brigades and to successfully push them back. Both the skirmish regiments are twice the size of any of my infantry regiment, which increases our firepower substantially, but also decreases their maneuverability, allowing me to easily flank around them, allowing me to take advantage of their relatively low morale by flanking around them. The plan of attack for my main thrust is to use two of my columns to attack Best Hanoverians, to push them just off the victory point, while using the rest of my columns to easily push back Pack and Bylandt's brigade from the flank, splitting this attack in two phases, one where I hit their flank initially, and eventually when they turn their brigade, moving two other columns to attack their newly exposed flank. Just like last time, I'll be sending my columns in by wave, sending in two columns to attack one side each, simultaneously. At this time, I'm forming up Bijlandt's brigade to move in to attack the flank of Best Hanoverians, moving his brigade on the road to hopefully force Best to form battle line facing us, thus forcing him farther away from the victory point, making it easier for us to push his Hanoverian Landwehr away from the victory point. There's one major obstacle to our attack. There's a battery of cannon in the center who will pour canister directly into our rank, forcing our brigade back easily if we don't attack it first. And so I pulled a bit of a cheap move, splitting off a battalion of skirmishers to move in to attack it directly. A tactic you'll all be familiar with if you saw the other video, but in that video it didn't go very well. In this video, we have different results. On a vomit, to the guns! The column counts on our actions. We shall not stand if those cannons blast us with grape. Remember, we are to conquer or die. Charge! For France and for the Emperor! And with that, the men of the battalion split off, making directly for the artillery. The nearby Hanoverian Landwehr get up, expecting the small battalion to attack them. As the men approach the guns, many know it's going to be a suicide mission. They can be blasted by canister fire, or surrounded and bayoneted by the nearby regiments. Still, they pursue their objective, knowing that if they fail, their entire column will be pushed back, with blasts of canister fire tearing them to shreds as they retreat. When the skirmishers are a few yards from the guns, they get blasted by volley fire from the nearby Hanoverian Landwehr as the first gun makes its escape. Half the company is cut down, but skirmishers still go on. As the second gun begins to limber and withdraw, we capture it, as well as the battery commander. Then we get the third gun. The fourth gun, while we are capturing the third, limbers up and nearly manages to escape. All the while, the Hanoverian Landwehr prepares, wheeling to face the nearby skirmishers. However, we're able to capture the fourth gun, and then the fifth. But then the Hanoverians open up a devastating volley, forcing our men to withdraw. The company only makes it a few yards before they are captured by companies from the Nassauers, which forces them to surrender, returning to the rear as prisoners. However, the capturing of the battery gives us an immediate advantage, and so the skirmishers' actions were not in vain. Moving over to the other column, we begin our attack on Bylandt's brigade. Starting with only two regiments, we have to dislodge the budging infantry from the thorny hedges behind the sunken lane, and so to do this I decide to move one of my battalions to move on their flank. as attacking them from the front would be a costly affair that we cannot afford, especially with Pax Highlanders so close. As the battalion advances onto the flank of the Belgian troops, I contemplate attacking the Dutch Jaeger out in front of Bylandt's brigade. However, I quickly decide that the ground battery's bombardment will cause far more casualties than an infantry engagement, and will cause far less casualties on my side. And so I look to the other column, looking for an opportunity to advance around the flank of the Nassau light troops in front of Besse's Hanover and Landwehr, as with my 3 battalions attacking their 1 would be a far more costly firefight in a head-to-head battle. Going back to the Belgic firefight, the battalion was nearly reaching its position. In the meantime, I decided to move another battalion to sweep behind the Belgian infantry, moving them behind the 3 other battalions of the brigade, and moving the advancing battalion into a much closer position to allow their first volley to be even more devastating. All the while, the Belgians are distracted by the firefight to their front, allowing us to sneak out extremely close. Originally, I move up our men in double time, but then knowing the long firefight they have ahead, I decide to walk them up instead, allowing our troops to take a few more casualties as they move, but all the while benefiting us in the long run. Finally, our men arrive in position and form into line, making ready to fire into the flank of the nearby Belgian units. All the while, the small battalion advances in support. My men carefully move into position, carefully taking their mark, taking some time to fire, but when they do, they unleash a devastating fire into the flank of the Belgians, eliminating 1 company almost instantly. Then we opened up a flurry of musketry on the flank of the Belgian regiment. I remember one of the head corpses getting caught on a thorny hedge. One of the members of the battalion cruelly joked that he would be the last defender of the ridge. As our infantry opens a devastating wall of lead, we move over to the attack on the Haisson, passing the firefight of the other Dutch troops, as well as checking the bombardment of the nearby Dutch Jaeger. As we arrive at the farmhouse, we notice that our troops have made little progress, as well as taking heavy, accurate fire, while taking cover in the orchard. Moving back up the ridge, we notice that the troops in contest with the Belgian infantry have managed to use their overwhelming numbers to push back the Belgian infantry, who are forced to retreat. Noticing the break of the Belgian troops, I decide to move forward the rest of my brigade, to press the attack into the rest of Bylandt's brigade, moving them up to the road to attack the other battalions. But once the order is given, 2 of the battalions appear to be hesitant and don't follow the order. But after a little reassurance from Marshal du Camp Grenier, he was able to move forth 1 more battalion to aid in his attack, but not before moving his column forth at least twice. The hesitance from the 1 battalion allowed the Belgians enough time to reorganize. And so the 1 hesitant battalion is ordered forth into the sunken lane to open fire upon the regrouping Belgian forces. All the while, the rest of the column is moved forward to attack the remainder of Bylandt's brigade. But as the battalion gets into position, I reorganize the rest of the column to move into attack, moving the hesitant battalion to the far left flank where it will face less pressure and so will be more convinced to move into attack. As the column moves into position, I order forth the other hesitant battalion to attack the flank of the nearby Hanoverian Landwehr, who threaten the flank of the other attacking column. In the meantime, I send a battalion to flank the Nassauers in combat with the rest of the column, then briefly checking on the attack on Bylandt's brigade before returning to the other hesitant battalion once again, and returning to the firefight with Bylandt's brigade once again, where the Belgians wheel around to face our attacking column. As the Belgians get into position, I move forth the rest of the column to attack the other battalions of Bylandt's brigade around the same time, as well as bringing my battalions into more effective musket range. While the commander is hesitant at first, he is convinced to move forth after remembering Durland's words after giving the orders to attack, that they must conquer or die. Around the same time the column moves forward, a Dutch militia unit moves in to counterattack, forcing Grenier to move his column into position at the double. As the column gets into position, we return down the ridge to the firefight at La Haisson, where our men are still making little progress due to the heavy fire from the King's German Legion. Was waited until we were about 100 paces from the wall before they opened up a barrage of accurate fire, cutting down many of the fellows in the first rank and any approaching the gate. We hover around the firefight at Le Haisson for some time. Seeing that there's no visible progress, I decide to return to the firefight at the ridge, where the Dutch National Militia Battalion is advancing towards our column at the double. After moving up to check on the firefight between us and the Belgian line infantry, I noticed that the British line infantry have engaged our flank as well, which causes me to worry that the entirety of Pack's brigade is going to move in to attack us. So I move in the 25th Line Infantry, who's making little progress in attacking the flank of the Hanoverian Landwehr, moving them all along the road to attack the Royal Scots. But after a few minutes when they get into position, I realize they're not in range, and so I move them back to attack the flank of the Hanoverian Landwehr once again, which they do to devastating effect. Leaving them, I decide to go out to check on the other battalions in the regiment. Going down the line, I notice that the battalion I had sent to flank the Nassauers is beginning to withdraw, and so I rally them, moving them in to attack them once again. Moving to Le Haisson, I notice our reserve is under heavy shell fire. The enemy battery has decimated our columns with cannonballs and shells. They smothered us in mud and soaked ground. The commander of our 2nd Battalion was mortally wounded. The captain of our company was struck by 2 balls. Adjutant Huma and the Eagle Bearer were both killed. With the second burst of cannon fire, the drummer blasted his arm. Soon after, we were given orders to advance, which he played with his left arm until he fainted. And with that, I deployed a column into battle, moving up to fight the Dutch Jaeger, as well as the remaining battalions of Bylandt's brigade, including 3 National Militia battalions. Then I check upon the other column, which is attacking Best Hanoverian Landwehr, which seems to be going smoothly, before returning once again to the advance of the other column. As the column advances up the muddy slopes towards its objective, it is bombarded with shells from the nearby Royal Artillery batteries. Seeing that they have little cover, I tell them to advance in line with the other column, and when they arrive at their objective, they are to move around and coil around the remainder of Bylandt's brigade, including the Jaeger, going to the other column which is already engaged with Bylandt's brigade. I note that the forces that engage with the Belgian line infantry are taking heavy casualties. We're out of cover, and so that would make sense. I look over to the flanks to look for a proper explanation, and I notice the Royal Scots have engaged their flank. This panicked me somewhat, as I believed that the rest of Pack's brigade would come down and attack our flank, which would severely endanger the attack. But to deal with the more immediate problem, I decide to look over at the other firefight, where I notice the flanking battalion has successfully pushed back one of the Hanoverian Landwehr, and so I decide to redeploy them on the road to attack the Royal Scots. Around the same time, I decide to move forth with the rest of the column to push back the rest of the Hanoverian Landwehr from the victory point, moving forth at the double so I can easily push back the retreating troops. But as I get into position, I impatiently order them to charge the retreating Hanoverian Landwehr, just so we can quickly push back the Hanoverians before we can move in more troops to claim the victory point for more score. And our men charge forth, bursting from the hedgerows, pushing back the Hanoverian Landwehr at first contact. To support this new attack, I move forth the rest of the column to attack the remaining members of the Hanoverian Landwehr. Moving these new forces in to attack the Hanoverians caused the victory point to become contested. Unfortunately, we do not have enough men yet to capture the victory point for ourselves, and so I go over to the other firefight, where I move in the 3rd column to attack the flank of Bylandt's brigade. Returning again to the firefight of Le Haisson, we are making little progress, so I decide to move forth one of the battalions for the rear of the column to attack the men on the walls of the farmhouse. All the while, the guns of the Grand Battery continue to bombard the men on the ridge. Particularly heavy casualties are taken by the men of Bylandt's brigade on the forward part of the ridge, as well as the 95th Rifles in the sandpit on the flank of Le Haisson. All the while, we can see the troops of the 3rd column moving in to attack the flank of Bylandt's brigade. The 3rd column has nearly reached its position to attack the Dutch Jaeger, as well as moving in to attack the flank and rear of the nearby National Militia. As soon as my men get into range, the Dutch Jaeger immediately reposition to attack us. But with such a large battalion, they take quite some time to reform, giving the 2nd Battalion of the 1st rank of our column plenty of time to get into position to open fire upon them. In the meantime, I return to the firefight with the Royal Scots. The 25th Line Infantry is causing heavy casualties to the Royal Scots, as the Royal Scots continue to pour flanking fire to the rest of the units of our column. In the meantime, the 2nd column continues to reform, to push back the last of Best Hanoverian Landwehr. We organize the column to attack the flank of the 2 attacking battalions, before returning once again to the firefight with the Bylandt's brigade, where we're inflicting heavy casualties on the National Militia as well as the Dutch Jaeger. As the firefight begins, I begin to move forth with 2 rear battalions to flank around the Nassauers and to put more pressure on the National Militia, to surround them and easily push them back, allowing our men room to go to the next victory point. Going into the 2nd Battalion, I notice that the Belgian line infantry are again falling back due to heavy casualties. However, the regiment that's engaged in them is also taking quite heavy casualties due to fire from the Belgians as well as the Royal Scots nearby firing on their flank. And through this they are beginning to withdraw, so I move forth Grenier to rally them, as well as telling them to stop withdrawing as there's support nearby. In the meantime, we're still shooting up the flank of the National Militia to our front. In the firefight, we've destroyed at least 2 companies of their men. Then we return to the firefight of the Haison, where we see the first signs of progress as one of the King's German Legion companies withdraws from the farmhouse. All the while, the 3rd Battalion that had moved in to the attack struggles to get within range, but eventually moving it up extremely close in a sort of zigzag pattern, we finally get them to fire on the farmhouse's garrison. While the 1 battalion moves up, we can see in the background 1 battalion of the King's German Legion are hiding in the back garden, which caused me to wonder why they're not supporting their comrades in the farmhouse, and also the fact that if we take the farmhouse, they'll be shot to pieces. This is excellent news, as with only 1 company of King's German Legion left and 1 in reserve behind the farmhouse, we can easily move in and take the objective, which is an important victory point which is quite valuable for us. Finally, when the battalion is only a couple yards from the farmhouse walls, they're finally in range, allowing me to put more pressure on the farmhouse itself. I'm not exactly sure why they had to get this close in order to effectively fire upon the farmhouse. With them in place, I finally go back to the firefight on the ridge once again. First checking upon the firefight with the Dutch Jaeger, we've surrounded them, allowing us to put heavy casualties on them from all angles, allowing us to easily push them back in time. Moving farther up the ridge, we can see that our men are making steady progress against the Dutch National Militia, as well as the Belgian line infantry. Unfortunately, around this time, the battalion that was threatening to withdraw earlier has retreated, opening up a massive gap in our line that the enemy could exploit. Going over to the other firefight, we broke the other battalion of Hanoverian landwehr, allowing us to move forward the rest of the brigade, despite how battered it has been, to move in to secure the victory point. I quickly spread them out along the roadside to take up defensive positions against the nearby Hanoverians. Unfortunately, the battalion that we previously broke has quickly reformed alongside the other Hanoverian landwehr, but these new positions along the roadside will allow us to open fire on the nearby Hanoverian landwehr, and the rest of the brigade is too far away to hold the victory point at this point. And so after capturing this, we'll stop the advance in this direction. So we'll focus the rest of our reserves on the attack on Bylandt and Pack's brigades. After checking briefly on the firefight with Bylandt's brigade, and seeing that the situation is doing quite well, I decided to move up our reserve to make another attack. Move the 4th column into the center of our line to move to attack the rest of Pack's brigade, overwhelming the Scottish Peninsula veterans. Alas, it's not looking well for the firefight at Bylandt's brigade as another battalion withdraws, opens up a wider gap for Bylandt's brigade to counterattack. However, around the same time, the Dutch Jaeger break, only to move in to attack with the relatively fresh troops from the 3rd Reserve column. I moved to flank around Bylandt's brigade, taking up defensive positions in the sunken lane, being sure not to get in range of the 95th Rifles in the sandpit nearby. 2 Dutch National Militia units who are not engaged with us immediately react to our attack, having to face this new threat approaching. However, my men are confident of our success, now that Bylandt's brigade is mostly unorganized and only consisting of militia units. I quickly changed my brigade's movement to attack the 2 units that have already been in a drawn-out firefight with my columns, moving around them to attack the rear and flank. The 1 battalion which is sweeping around the flank of the brigade gets closer. They reveal nearby artillery batteries, many artillery batteries, as well as lines upon lines of British regulars in wait behind the ridge. Fortunately, these nearby artillery batteries are sparsely guarded. British regulars are far away, and there's only one unit of Dutch National Militia nearby. Enough for us to quickly move in a company to swipe away many of the guns. Meantime, we move many other battalions to surround the remainder of Bylandt's brigade, leading elements of the 1st and 3rd column to move in and surround the remaining elements. The 2 National Militia units are easily surrounded, as well as the supplies, alongside Bylandt himself. Our battalions continue to constrict around Bylandt's brigade, just that the elements of the 2nd column are getting rather thin, and so I decided to move our reserves up to support them, as well as taking the victory point. Looking up our map, I check on the remaining reserves that we have, before going to the firefight of the Haison once again, noticing that the Rock and Wellington Centre is still holding. Balance of canister are returned to the firefight with Bylandt's brigade, where I noticed that the Allied artillery have opened up massive hails of canister fire towards our rank, so I split off a battalion to attack them, but disaster strikes. as they're cut down by canister. The company advanced in a huddle before their ranks were blasted with grape, which hurled men back, writhing in the mud, splattering the nearby battalion with blood and rays. And with the blast of canister fire, the men are sent back through the parent battalion and back off the battlefield itself. In the meantime, due to such heavy casualties, the parent battalion begins to withdraw as well, so I send forth Marshal du Camp Noguer to rally them, as well as moving them to a rear position behind the other units of the battalion. Moving to the other units of the battalion, I notice that the National Militia are beginning to withdraw, and so I send forth the 45th Regiment of the line into a bayonet charge to quickly break them and push them back. Moving away from them and going over to the second column, I move forth our reserves to support them, as our men continue to pour devastating fire into the last remaining battalion of the Hanoverian Landwehr, losing the majority of their flanking companies. During this firefight, I decide to move around the 29th Regiment of the line, but I am fascinated by a new menu that I've never seen before. But after telling it to go away, I successfully am able to move them to more effectively fire onto the flank of the Hanoverian Landwehr. Going over to another battalion of the 45th Regiment of the line, and I see how they compare against the Royal Scots, and not well, judging by their negative 106 score. Moving them back a few paces and then wheeling them about to face the Scottish forces, allowing them to put more effective musketry on them, but still telling them to hold the line. Returning to the firefight with the remainder of Bylandt's brigade, it seems that our bayonet charge was successful against the National Militia, allowing us to push back the entire battalion, leaving only one to remain. Unfortunately, around this time, the battalion decides to form a column, which I quickly form back into a line again to attack the flank of the National Militia. Around the same time, moving out more battalions to attack the National Militia, who are in heavy cover, hoping to overwhelm them with more numbers. Going back to the firefight at Le Hesson, the last of the King's German Legion have withdrawn, and so I quickly move in to capture the farmhouse before the reserve King's German Legion in to recapture the farmhouse themselves, rushing forth one battalion and sending the other three in by marching them.
You men, fill the holes in the wall! They can't say there's no wood left. It was stop this morning. Send tails of men to conserve ammunition and evacuate the farmhouse.
As the battalions move forward, they still take heavy shell fire as they move. I decide to move up several batteries to support the flanks of the farmhouse in case the Allies make a counterattack, moving one by the ridge and another behind the orchard. Then we're going back to the firefight with Bylandt's brigade. Things have petered out as one of our battalions have broken off from the firefight with the Dodge and line infantry. Going over to the other side, the moving forth of the 4th column has allowed us to take the victory point. As they moved into position, they moved into battle line to protect themselves. But then I sent 2 of the battalions into the attack against the British and Dutch line infantry. Then going down the line, we can see that we've torn up the flank of the Hanoverian Landwehr. Going down the ridge to move up our 5th and 6th reserve columns to a close reserve position, I noticed that one of our battalions had withdrawn, under pressure from the firefight with Bylandt's brigade. After moving up one of the columns, I moved the 46th Line Infantry, who I apparently forgot about, who are currently taking heavy shell fire, up to support the attack. In the meantime, going over to the other firefight, I noticed that the 2 columns I moved forward from the 4th column are nearly in position to attack the Dutch and British line infantry, and quickly moving into our line, advancing aggressively on the flank of the Royal Scots. Looking back at the firefight with Bylandt's brigade, our column isn't doing very well, as another one of the battalions withdraws, probably due to the canister fire from the nearby cannon, and so I decided on something a bit more drastic to help us proceed and break the loss of Bylandt's brigade. I opt to move my men extremely close to blast away the loss of Dutch militia, allowing us to get to the cannon. Then I move my men into column at the double, charging forth and bursting from the hedgerows in a bayonet charge, using one of the most traumatic moments for one of our soldiers. We charge the Dutch troops, and the next few moments keep me awake at night. Men turn into animals as they trample each other, moving in, smashing each other's skulls with rifle butts, slashing open stomachs with bayonets, saber, and hanger. The wounded in desperation tear at the men's throats with their teeth, and our men are caught up in the hellish melee with the flash of bayonets and the firing of close-range muskets, sabers, bayonets, and teeth. Many a man falls on both sides in this combat, displaying the true viciousness of combat, which is easy to hide in the volleys between two companies. All the while, Bylandt and a fellow officer looks on in horror. Eventually, one cannot stand it any longer as they return to his duties somewhere else. But eventually, our battalion breaks. But eventually, during the hellish melee, somebody mentions surrender, and eventually it spreads throughout our entire battalion, and all the men surrender. Many who also attempt to retreat also are captured. And so the battalions nearby begin to return fire on the Dutch National Militia, in turn killing many of the French troops that they recently captured. And so I begin to position battalions closer to the Dutch National Militia to get more effective fire upon them to break them faster, as well as moving up the marshal de camp to rally them so they don't break. As one battalion moves forward and wheels about, a cannonball rips through their rank like a bowling ball through pins. And with such heavy casualties taken all at once, the battalion cannot stand and begins to withdraw. In the meantime, however, the other battalion continues to move forward, and the column successfully reaches its position to take fire on the Dutch National Militia's flank. Moving to the other firefight, we notice that the two battalions I had moved forward to engage the Belgian Line Infantry and the Royal Scots have been extremely effective as they've inflicted many casualties on them. The other battalions farther down the line have inflicted heavy casualties, nearly killing half of the remaining battalion of Hanoverian Landwehr. In the meantime, with the 4th column moved up, we have enough men to capture the victory point, and we are beginning to harvest points from it. As the firefight continues, the two battalions engaging the Hanoverian Landwehr appear to be getting thin in rank. Despite this, I peel off another battalion to move in on the flank of the Belgian Line Infantry. As we move to see the progress of the columns moving to their close reserve positions, we see another battalion has broken from the firefight with Bylandt's brigade, which means that I'll probably have to deploy these reserves sooner rather than later, which is what I've appeared to have done regardless, moving them into their close reserve position and moving them just behind the troops already engaged. Around this time we move out to the firefight of the Haison, where we see that the final battalion of King's German Legion skirmishers have been pushed back from the hail of fire that the new French garrison has unleashed upon them. All the while the Grand Battery continues to pound the ridge, including the 95th Rifles, who are the last ones on the forward side of the ridge from the Allied side at this point. Likewise, our Royal Artillery answers back, attempting as best they can to return fire and suppress the Grand Battery. However, they have too few guns. Going back to the firefight with the Dutch militia, our men continue to pour flanking fire, trapping them in the sunken lane. Going farther down the ridge, we notice that the battalion that was pushed back by the Dutch National Militia has reformed, and so I'm going to move it to the Marshal du Camp to rally them. In the meantime, one of the battalions firing on the flank of the Dutch National Militia is beginning to take heavy fire from the nearby Royal Artillery batteries, and I begin to advance our men closer, within probably 50 yards of the Dutch National Militia, negating their cover, allowing our muskets to do their work. In the meantime, the battalion that I sent forth to attack the Belgian Line Infantry has arrived, and I'm quickly moving into the sunken lane to return fire upon them. They take heavy fire from the Belgian Line Infantry as they rush into position at the sunken lane. In the meantime, as the Royal Scots are taking heavy casualties, something disastrous happens for the Allies.
It would appear the British are getting more than they reckon. Keep putting on that fire, men. They will soon take to their heels.
We were trading balls with the French, with Picton yelling in the background,
Huzzah! Pour on that fire, you bastards!
when suddenly the great general slumped and fell from his horse. I and another man ran to the fallen general. I wiped the mud from his face to find blood on my handkerchief. The general had been killed. With such heavy casualties and the death of General Picton, I decided to keep up the pressure by moving up one of our battalions. But in order to keep a good defensive on that flank, we need to secure the other, so I go to the other flank and begin to move our troops into defensive positions along the roadside. This being particularly easy now, as the last Hanoverian battalions have been pushed back far away from the victory point. At the same time, we moved the 8th Regiment of the Line to move in to attack the flank of the Royal Scots. Returning to the firefight with Bylandt's brigade, I noticed that the Dutch National Militia had finally been pushed back, so I began to move my battalions into the sunken lane, allowing them to put flanking fire into the nearby Belgian line infantry. But as they move into the sunken lane, they are hit by heavy artillery, forcing back another one of the battalions. So in order to resume the attack, I move up the 5th column to take up positions, as well as moving out the other battalions that were previously firing on the Dutch National Militia to wheel about and fire the Belgian line infantry from the cover of the sunken lane, thus giving them a taste of their own medicine. I beg my pardon, now's the time where we take up defensive positions along the road by the other victory point to stop any Hanoverian advances. In the meantime, I move over to survey the crossroads to plan my next attack, paying particular attention to the 95th Rifles, who will want to push back so they don't pour flanking fire to my attacking units. And then I return to our rear, putting forth the 6th column into an attacking position. Deciding against it, I decide to move them forward to flank in the final attack on the ridge. So I go up the ridge once again, focusing on the column that's attacking there, moving them into a battle line. Going back between our fight with the Belgians, they are taking heavy fire from our troops in the sunken lane, as well as heavy shell fire from the Grand Battery. Then going down our line, we see that the British troops are still standing firm despite taking heavy casualties with almost half their unit destroyed. Then going down to the flank where the Hanoverians have refused to counterattack. And going back to the column moving up the ridge, who have now made their position, and the Dutch National Militia have moved in to react, taking positions in the sunken lane, preparing to defend the ridge, as the nearby batteries of Royal Artillery begin to load canister shot. Learning from my last assault, I decided to move some of my battalions and flank around the sides of the National Militia, knowing that they will stand and fight for quite some time if I don't do this. As I see the exposed cannon, I decided to split off another company of skirmishers, this time breaking off more than 50 men, so if they take canister fire, they won't immediately break like last time. And I immediately rush them forward, much to the horror of the nearby gunners, who are expecting support from the nearby infantry. As my men rush past the sunken lane, they take canister fire, felling 2 of the men. Thankfully, this time they don't immediately break, and they burst from the hedgerows. Likewise, take another blast of canister fire as they still move in and approach. So run them forth, hoping that they don't charge into the Dutch National Militia or the nearby English infantry, but to at least get 3 of the guns before I get pushed back. The first gun manages to limber and withdraw, and so I change the target, and then charge. I was able to capture 2 of the guns, taking a blast of volley fire and my men still stand firm, but eventually they decided to charge directly into the side of the Dutch National Militia. Unable to make them halt, I ordered them to retreat, and after some confusion, allowing the nearby English infantry to put more shots onto them and cause more casualties, they withdraw. The nearby gunners are horrified by this new predicament, now that they're not supported. While the Royal Artillery is in disarray, I move out some of my battalions to take up positions in the sunken lane, making sure there's no gaps in our line that the British Brigade can take advantage of. Moving farther down the line, things are going extremely well, with the Belgian infantry and the Royal Scots being broken. So I return to our rear to move up our final reserve unit to easily sweep in and flank the remaining units around the crossroads. Move them up but misclick, putting them in battle line. To the firefight with the Dutch National Militia, begin to flank around the units, so learning from earlier, as well as the skirmishers have regrouped, and so I return them to their parent unit. Around the same time, the cannons form up once again to pour canister into the ranks of our column, so I plan something to disturb them once again. Splitting off a company from the regiment holding our flank, and moving them around our battalion to move to attack the crossroads more directly into the batteries of cannon. Doing the same thing as last time, splitting off an 100-man company opposed to a 50-man so they can resist canister fire more effectively. Originally I charged directly for the same area, but then I changed my mind, moving them around the rest of the column, all the while under pressure from the nearby batteries of cannon, pouring canister fire into the farthest battalion of our column. And so I quickly tell the men of the skirmish company to run around the rest of the column. All the while, the Dutch National Militia are under heavy musket fire, and the 95th Rifles are under heavy cannon fire. Thus, the two threats to the company have been neutralized. As the company reaches the flank of our column, I immediately tell them to advance towards the nearby batteries. As the skirmish company approaches, an artillery officer nearby flees. Before doing so, he orders his cannons to limber and withdraw. As he goes, he warns the nearby supply wagon. The skirmishers are about halfway there. The cannon successfully limbers, but they are still caught in the sunken lane, and struggle to escape, as my men break into a charge. Seeing that the charge would draw us away from the majority of the batteries, I change my direction and move directly to the larger mass of guns that are away from the crossroads. Many of the artillery officers were not expecting them to change direction so quickly, and so they quickly panic and tell their men to limber, but almost as if they've been training for this for ages, they manage to do it in time, and the nearby infantry blasts our advancing skirmishers. The battalion rushed forth, the greatest of a generation. After one crisp volley, the pride of France disappeared in a puff of smoke. But as my men go charging among the cannon, they are shot down to a man. Although they are able to put the cannons into disarray, capture one gun and one officer. Many of the guns fleeing in panic, not knowing that the French have been dispersed. But eventually their officers figure this out, and they begin to redraw their battery lines once again to blast canister into our ranks, but now they're behind English infantry, so they cannot. With the batteries nowhere near them, the Dutch National Militia have now become isolated, and are threatened by multiple French battalions. In the meantime, I go to Le Haisson and notice that the 95th Rifles could potentially open fire, and notice that one of my battalions have left the farmhouse, and so I move them out to attack the grasshoppers. In the meantime, the Dutch National Militia look to the English for assistance, but they do nothing, protecting the artillery as it reforms. Looking for support, the officer looked to the nearby regiments of English troops. They did nothing, as we held the line by ourselves in a maelstrom of lead. Taking advantage of their isolation, I moved forward my battalions insanely close to the Dutch National Militia, pressing them to either withdraw or draw into a melee with many of our units at the same time, and thus still force their withdrawal. Around the same time, the victory point nearby has become contested. As our battalions finally get into position, Bylandt himself rushes to this one battalion and tells them to take heart and hold the line. The English will be there to support them soon, but both the officers knew that this was a lie. As my battalions finally get to their positions, draw up, and open up a hailstorm of lead their way. Bylandt, receiving 2 musket balls through his coat, but miraculously was still unscathed, is forced to withdraw. To put even more pressure on the Dutch National Militia, I move around to put another battalion on their flank. Around the same time, I move up the Marshal du Camp. The attack can maintain its orderly fashion, even though shells explode overhead with shrapnel raining down upon the French infantry advancing. Marshal du Camp arrives with the rest of his column, rallying them despite the canister fire flying in from the nearby batteries. His column still exchanging fire with the nearby French National Militia, who are jumping out from behind the hedges and opening fire on the nearby French battalions. So he orders another battalion forward, directly on the flank of the Dutch National Militia, attempting to force them to wheel around to face them. Flank, we have pushed back the Royal Scots and are in a position to advance on the rest of the British infantry. In the meantime, we go down the ridge, where the final column has arrived in this position to support our attack. I go over to the Union Brigade of the Allied Army, which, spoiler alerts, if you know what's happening, you know why I'm checking. After briefly going back to the firefight with the Dutch militia, I briefly go back to Bylandt, where I check over our victory score, which is twice the amount for a major victory, so I'm pretty confident at this stage. About near Le Haisson, the battalion has nearly arrived in position to attack the 95th Rifles in the sandpit. I want to wait until they get into position before I move into attack. In the meantime, going back to the firefight with the Dutch militia, that one outlying battalion in front of the ridge is still being bombarded with the Royal Artillery. Wanting to have them stand there to take this fire much longer, move them into on the flank of the Dutch militia again, because for whatever reason they refuse the order. Then I tell them to charge, which immediately pushes back the Dutch National Militia, telling us to move in and take the victory point as soon as we disperse the cannon. So I order the Marshal du Camp to tell his column to follow defensive positions in the sunken lane, while I give new orders. He struggles to do so, with the English infantry so close. He hopes that they do not attack, as they will easily push them back, with his brigade being so weak. He struggles to form into a position, which allows the Royal Artillery nearby to bombard and cause heavy casualties to his nearby battalions, particularly that of the unlucky 105th. In retaliation, to send out another skirmish brigade of a small unit of 50 men to push back the remaining batteries beyond the infantry, to hopefully lessen their torment. So they rush forth over the open ground, during which their parent battalion takes a huge hit from another cannon beyond another company of men. So they stop. Actually, the Marshal du Camp orders them forward once again, so I'm insisting that they must take out those two cannons or the entire column will be destroyed. They set out for the cannons once again at the double. Eventually they make it to the guns, charging one and capturing one. And they move to another one. The limbers just in time, and so I have to leave their position. So when I get near to them, I send another charge order, but they make for the 33rd Foot, wanting the skirmish company to be destroyed. I order them to withdraw. Only one of the cannons remain, but I have more pressing orders at this time. Moving the rest of the column into position in the sunken lane, to allow them to have a good defensive position, but the Marshal du Camp is hesitant to move his men to the edge of the thorny hedges. After a bunch of fussing around, I eventually get him to move relatively right along to go, and so I give up and tell his men to move forward. Column takes up its defensive positions along the sunken lane. I consider taking out the 95th Rifles, who are now threatening my rear. I sent out the battalion from La Haye-Saint as well as one from the reserve that I just moved up to flank around both sides. You can see why I made this decision eventually, as when I zoom in we can see that the 90th Rifles are firing as well as my battalion on the farthest left flank of the reserve column is also firing at each other, but not causing any casualties since they're not facing each other. I begin to move in but to make this attack by facing the battalion towards the 95th Rifles, and eventually moving them in nice and close so they can actually hit them. When I face them towards the 95th Rifles, they for some reason become out of range. Check to see if I have any more reserves left. I notice that the enemy are behind us.
Hussars, the enemy? It doesn't matter, they are not our priority. If the Hussars are finished harassing the local peasant girls, they might consider doing their job and round up the prisoners. Ah, look, to the southwest! The enemy, shall we give chase? No, leave it to the Lancers. If they're not feeling like pretentious knights, they might actually consider doing their job.
After the small crisis of finding out what unit is behind our line and how to deal with it, I go over to look at the hundreds of units of cavalry to figure out why they're not giving chase when there's easy units just in reach to capture. After that, I return to the farmhouse of La Haye-Saint. Oversee our attack on the 95th Rifles with the two battalions I set out. For a brief moment I wondered why they were kicked out, but I figured out that the fort was at absolute capacity. Then I send the battalion forward towards the sandpit, but not before I send the other battalion around its flank in order to pin down the riflemen. As the battalion advanced to the front of the 95th Rifles, they begin to take fire from them, as the other battalion moving into flank them have not gotten range yet, so they're taking unnecessary casualties. So I quickly rush the flanking battalion in to trade fire with the 95th Rifles. We'll have a clear advantage since they're more accurate, but we will shoot much faster, and that will be much more important at this range. And as they advance, are being attacked by the artillery, which is helping to pin them down slightly, helping them not to fire on our men as much. British officer, I think it's Kemp, moves in to support the riflemen as they're getting surrounded, rallying them by saying how valuable their position is and that they need to hold it. As my battalion gets closer, moving into bayonet charge the 95th Rifles, I go to check on the cavalry once again, and the Union Brigade is now in motion, which is really getting me scared. I know the damage they can cause if I'm not prepared for their charge. And so I begin to move up the reserve column in square formation behind the sunken lane, waiting for the first line to shoot out the cavalry, and then for them to retreat behind the squares. In the meantime, the unlucky 105th is finally pushed back by the continuous bombardment of shells, as our two battalions continue to move on the 95th Rifles. Around this point, I decide to move up the battalion to form into the squares behind our lines, hoping they don't get blasted by the artillery and nearby line infantry as they form into square. And back to the firefight with the 95th Rifles. They quickly break after only a few volleys from our two French battalions, likely due to the heavy bombardment of artillery that they've been received throughout this entire battle, even standing up during it. A minor threat from the British officers still standing there that the line will collapse if they do not hold, with them stand their ground in the sand pit, only to be buried in a mass grave in the sand pit itself. So I begin to form our defensive positions with the last of these two battalions on our flank, so the cavalry can't move around our lines. But as I move to the remainder of our line in the sunken lane, the cavalry is getting too close for our men to support them, so I begin to prepare to form them into square. I continue to form up the big battalions behind our lines. The cavalry draws ever nearer. In the meantime, the 95th Rifles manage to reform, and so I rush for the battalion to take cover in the sand pit to blast away at them until they withdraw once again. Unfortunately, as our battalions get into line, one of them strays too far and gets shot up by the 95th Rifles, who are now facing them on their flank. They move them back, hoping that they don't take any unnecessary casualties from the 95th Rifles' fire. Meantime, going up to our main line, I notice that the cavalry has begun their charge, pulling my men up into squares as they prepare for the worst, as a most gruesome sight beholds them.
The enemy cavalry charged forth, their iron shields crushing the dead and wounded, and those who could have been saved were immediately killed, as the men of Eton rode towards our squares and back again. As the cavalry approaches, I put my nearby battalions into square. The battalion I want in the center to continue firing also forms into square, as the officer fears that his men will be charged as well. The cavalry in confusion halt, allowing our troops within the square to open fire upon them, cutting down troops needlessly as they stand there waiting for us to move out of our squares. Meantime, the nearby infantry and cannon fire canister and volleys into the nearby squares that we're forced to make, but is still a far worse fate than being charged by the cavalry. So my men have to endure this as they wait for the cavalry to withdraw. In the meantime, the secondary line that I formed up just to repel the cavalry is standing there, waiting for their chance to fulfill their purpose of repelling the enemy cavalry. But right now, they're just repelling all infantry getting near the squares. Finally, the men of the heavy dragoons withdraw, or at least one of their squadrons does, as they begin to take unnecessary casualties and fire the men inside the squares, while we can see another one of the English battalions move in and take shots at one of the sides of the squares to weaken it so the cavalry can charge. But our men futilely attempt to return fire, but have little effect on the enemy. As one of the squadrons withdraw, I form one of my squares into line again so they can return fire, but then they become out of range of the nearby line infantry. When the second squadron of cavalry withdraws, I can finally move my men back into line again so they're not in range of the nearby artillery. They take cover in the sunken lane once again. As my men form into line once again, the cavalry returns for a second attempt to run off our infantry from the ridge. At this point, our best case scenario would be to form square just in time for the cavalry to charge into it, but I don't want to risk one of our battalions being run down by the cavalry. Keep a keen eye on the approaching squadron of heavy dragoons. When they break into the gallop, I quickly form my battalions back into square once again. And again, they halt, But at this time, our squares were taking heavy artillery fire as well as line infantry fire. In the meantime, I can see 2 more brigades of cavalry moving towards our other flank. It looks most glorious if you're part of the Allied army, but for us it's quite terrifying. We have a prepared a reserve line in case our first line breaks on that flank. The 2 squadrons will work by. It could be on a parade somewhere in Horse Guards or somewhere. But now they must be put to the test in battle. Meantime, the single squadron of heavy dragoons is still in front of our squares, taking unnecessary fire, as the nearby line infantry blasts our square with volleys upon volleys of heavy musketry. And I go to check on the other flank to make sure I'm prepared to move my units into line, hoping that they're not caught off guard by the huge amounts of heavy cavalry coming to their part of the line. Meantime, that same squadron of heavy dragoons is still standing there, taking shots from our nearby squares. French officer still stands in the middle, rallying our men to carry on and keep standing to make sure that these cavalry do nothing to our line, because if they do, they could potentially break our line and force us to retreat from Waterloo itself. Cavalry begins to fall, they begin to falter, and eventually they fall back. And so I move my men out of line and attempt to move them back away from the forward hedges in order for them to get out of the line of fire of the nearby battalion of line infantry. While I'm still anxiously thinking about the other heavy cavalry brigades moving over to the other side of the line. In the meantime, I attempt to move these battalions to the other side of the hedges in order to get them to be out of range of the line battalions. But as I do this, a cavalry return once again, attempting to break our line, so I quickly halt them and move the nearby troops into square. Moving the center one and then the rightmost one forms into square automatically. The leftmost one takes a bit more time, but this is absolutely horrible as they're guarding the Marshal du Camp himself. The British don't stick around for long as Ponsonby realizes he won't be able to break through this part of our line, with only squares being the thing to meet them. Surprised the men of Picton's division don't move in to counterattack us as we are extremely vulnerable while still in the square. But after taking a few casualties, Ponsonby realizes that he won't be able to break through our line here. As withdraws the heavy dragoons once again. After the heavy dragoons withdraw, I continue to attempt to move my battalion to the far side of the hedges, so they're out of the line of fire of the nearby British line infantry. Just in the nick of time, I head over to the other flank, where the British heavy cavalry have already arrived. Turn around once again only just to see the heavy dragoons make another charge for our line, quickly forming the rest of our battalions into square. Surprisingly, they move from a full gallop to an absolute halt almost immediately, allowing our troops to continue to pour fire on them and forcing them back once again. In the meantime, I go over to the other flank where the Scots Greys and I believe the Enniskillen Dragoons, if I remember correctly, are forming up to make a huge attack on this flank. When I've directed my full attention to this flank and are prepared to move my men into square. And so the cavalry begin to move forward, at the trot to begin with, giving myself plenty of time to form my battalions into squares, every so often on the other flank to make sure that the heavy dragoons have left, so I can form my troops back in line once again, so they're out of range of the nearby line infantry. But when I turn around again, I notice that the Enniskillen Dragoons have broken into a charge with the rightmost squadron of their troop. But they charged from so far away that they gave my battalions ample time to form into square. And so they basically do nothing. They move into a charge, and I'm thinking that they're going to charge directly into my square, but they halt just in time to get a volley from my nearby line infantry, and one of the cavalrymen immediately fall. Nearby troops also join in the firing, but unfortunately most of them miss, sending back the squadron once again, and as they retreat, another cavalryman falls. Going up to the other flank, I notice that we are truly out of range of the line infantry, but the cavalry still stand by, waiting to charge in, so I can't form my troops in the line to fire upon them. The center of my line is still holding firm with many battalions to form up counterattacks when the cavalry have been dispersed. Move many of those battalions into the nearby sunken lane, prepare for a counterattack. In the meantime, I go over to the other flank where the squadrons have been dispersed, as our men's fire was too much for them. The nearby Allied artillery is still being a real pain for my forces. The squares make excellent targets for the howitzer shells. At this point, I'm trying to do a sort of pike and shot style line, where I have some units in square while other units form line in the center of them so I can fire upon the cavalry a little bit more efficiently. Or even better, return fire upon the nearby battalions of line infantry. As the cavalry still hovers over us, I can't exactly make any good counterattacks without them being immediately charged. Curiously enough, on my far flank, there's a line battalion which forms line, firing on one of the squadrons, but the cavalry still refuses to charge because there's a square nearby. Those men must be really thankful for the nearby battalion. Even the troops by the rifles have formed into square, despite them not needing to be. They also become easy targets for the nearby cannon. Fortunately, I move one of my battalions back into line. Heavy dragoons catch me off guard, and I attempt to form them into square, but it is too late, and the men flee. They nearly make it into square, but the cavalry all of a sudden stop. Thankfully, because they've threatened my marshal du camp as well as the nearby battalion. And after some panicking, he actually manages to make it past the squares, but it doesn't matter regardless, as we got a major victory. Now to look over the casualties. And now for our adventures in time!
So where did you get that electric pistol anyway? I've seen nothing like them through all my years of service. Remember, I'm in the Secret Service. They make our gear special. They don't tell us. It's top secret. It's a miracle what this modern age can produce, but it's a shame us all focus on the wheels of war. If you remember anything from being a soldier, you know that war is profitable. Sometime later. Why did you send me on that suicide mission to the French camp? Well, just like your orders, ours are secret as well. We need to get rid of the variable, you, so the mission would have been an excuse to get rid of you, in case you were a spy. Or at least, I presume. We cannot afford being ambushed in the Somme Valley. We have a schedule to keep after all. Some more time later. What is the hold-up? Some of the troops are caught mucking around in the mud. They're holding up the entire column. Then what are you doing standing here? Go get the provost. I want those men arrested. Don't you think that's a little harsh? We cannot afford the time. We are this close to crushing Napoleon, revenging our troops at Jena, only to be held up by some peasants. Anyways, we have no time to think about that now. We must go around. We must send this message to the commander.